Hello everyone, it's Aria. Welcome back to my channel. Today's video is going to be about something that I'm sure some of you have heard about, but I myself have only recently found out about this, and it's super creepy and so disturbing. If the things that have happened here are real, then I don't know what to say. It's insane. But anyway, let's get on with the video. Located in southwestern Vermont in Bennington County is the town of Glastenbury. From 1834 till 1937, Glastenbury was quite populous thanks to its really big business in charcoal burning. The business was going so well because of the thick wooded areas in Glastenbury. Up until a point though, the town's tree supply ran out, and that was officially when the thriving had stopped. This led to the town dwindling into abandonment and the population going down at a rapid rate. Despite its ghost town status and not much to make this town stand out, a new kind of publicity has been brought to Glastenbury. An area demarcated in the town as the Bennington Triangle is a thick, dark, wooded, foresty area. The Bennington Triangle is in the Glastenbury Mountains and is the location of some baffling disappearances. The disappearances that have happened here are strictly limited to a 5-year time span. At least, these were the most confusing disappearances. The first is Middie Rivers. On the 12th of November in 1945, Middie decided to go on a hunt. Despite being 74 years old, Middie was said to be a very experienced hiker and hunter and had much knowledge about the woods, the wilderness, survival, and tracking. At this point, Middie was an experienced hunting guide and was leading his 4 fellow hunters in the Hell Hollow area. The Hell Hollow area is, as you guessed, right in the Bennington Triangle. Middie was in the lead and the other hunters were following a bit of a distance behind him. However, they were not really concerned because they knew of how experienced Middie was in this wilderness. After a while, however, the hunters realized that he was absolutely nowhere in sight and nowhere near them anymore. They did, however, believe that he would be able to find his way back to them and to civilization. He was, after all, someone who was least likely to get lost in the woodlands which he knew so well. He had an amazing set of skills with survival. However, this was not the case. Middie had completely vanished. Initially, after his disappearance was reported, the woods were extensively combed. Many did believe, however, that he would still manage to make his way back. After a while, more than 300 locals and soldiers had searched for Middie for 8 days straight. But sadly, no sign of him was ever found and no clue as well to indicate where he may be or what might have happened to him. The only piece of evidence ever recovered from Middie was a lone rifle cartridge. It was found in a stream not very far away from where he had disappeared, and the belief was that Rivers had dropped it while he was leaning over the stream. After that, however, nothing was found. He couldn't be tracked either, surprisingly. It was as if he had just disappeared into thin air. At this point, I don't think there's much hope of finding him at all, because he disappeared 76 years ago, and yet still, to this day, nothing has been found. The second unsolved disappearance is that of Paula Welden. The disappearance of Paula Welden is probably the most well-known case as it received the most publicity. At the time of her disappearance, she was just 18 years old. She had recently taken up hiking as a hobby, and on the 1st of December in 1946, around a year after the disappearance of Middie Rivers, that's what she decided to go do. Her choice of trail was the long trail in the woods near Glastenbury Mountains. Paula Welden was actually a student at Bennington College, and thus it would have been logical and very convenient for her to go hiking nearby after she finished her work shifts and then return back to campus. It was over the Thanksgiving holiday, and Paula had decided to stay at campus, though her friends all went back home to visit their families. A friend of Paula spoke about how Paula was feeling homesick and she was missing her family over the holiday. On that Sunday, she set off for her hike. Many people said that they had seen her depart for her hike wearing a bright red top. A Bennington Banner employee, Ernest Whitman, was also at the trail that day, and he had recognized Paula as he had given her directions while on the trail. An elderly couple also recognized Paula, as they said that they had seen her on the hiking trail and she was walking around 91 meters or about 100 yards in front of them. It was said that Paula had turned a corner, though, while she was walking, and by the time the couple had reached that corner, she was nowhere to be seen. This claim is already strange, as Paula was wearing a bright red top, so the fact that the couple couldn't see her at all anywhere on the trail or ahead of them is very mysterious. The report by the elderly couple is believed to have been the last time people had actually ever seen the real Paula Welden. The following day, after she didn't return to her classes, a missing persons report had been filed and the search began. Over 1,000 volunteers took part in the search, and a $5,000 reward was offered to anyone who had any knowledge of her whereabouts. Of course, no sign or any evidence was ever recovered. Other people had also started commenting on how Paula Welden wasn't wearing the appropriate clothing for the weather, as it was just 50 degrees Fahrenheit or 10 degrees Celsius outside, in the middle of winter. For this search, numerous helicopters had been deployed and a large amount of soldiers had also gone searching for her, but nothing was ever found. The most confusing part about this whole disappearance is the large amount of witnesses that had seen Paula on that day, that had spoken to Paula on that day, and that had seen her on the trail, and yet absolutely no leads were recovered, no clues were found, absolutely no evidence was found of Paula, and these claims of witnesses seeing her were never actually confirmed to be completely true. There weren't even considered any suspects behind Paula's disappearance. Some of the reports are also thought to be very incorrect, as Paula Welden, spotted in these places, couldn't have physically actually been there considering other witness reports. This led to the suspicion that people had confused Paula with another woman that looked very much like her. Another strange report was later made by a waitress at one of the restaurants near the Bennington hiking trails. The waitress claimed that she had been serving a woman who matched the description of Paula that evening of the hike at 9:30 p.m. The waitress even claimed that this woman was with another young man, around 25 years old, who was very intoxicated and very aggressive. The waitress also claimed that the woman had even spoken to her and asked her where Bennington was and where she was. The circumstances of this story told by the waitress, true or not, is so disturbing and so strange already. The waitress said the woman that she was speaking to seemed to be very desperate to get to Bennington. The woman was obviously very unaware of how close to Bennington she was, as she was at a restaurant just outside near the hiking trails. Obviously, with most disappearances, rumors and speculation start to circulate wildly. People started speculating that Paula had run off to Canada to live with her boyfriend, and some even decided that she had run off to the wilderness to live an isolated life and disconnected from the outside world. 2 weeks later, and only many confusing witness statements to go off of, and not much evidence, if at all, the police had finally decided to call off the search for Paula Welden. In 1951, a few years after Paula's disappearance, writer Shirley Jackson wrote the novel Hangs a Man, which is actually inspired by the disappearance of Paula Welden. 3 years after Welden's disappearance, the third disappearance would happen. James Tedford, a 68-year-old veteran and resident of the Bennington Soldiers' Home, was visiting relatives in St. Albans. St. Albans was about 3 hours away on a bus ride. On the 1st of December in 1949, which is coincidentally exactly 3 years after the disappearance of Paula Welden, James Tedford had boarded a bus back home to Bennington from St. Albans. There were numerous passengers on the bus that day, including James, and many had seen James on there, as well as exactly where he had sat and what he looked like. When the bus finally reached its last stop in Bennington, James Tedford was nowhere to be seen. Many witnesses stated that James was still in his seat at the last stop just before Bennington. However, James Tedford was no longer on the last stop, at the stop where he was supposed to get off. It was as if James had just vanished into thin air, considering the witness statements that he was on the bus at one point and not on the bus at a second point. It was found that James had left all his belongings behind on the bus, including his luggage and an open bus schedule on his seat. James Tedford's disappearance wasn't necessarily exactly the same as all the other disappearances. However, if all the witness statements are correct, including the bus drivers, James had disappeared in an area known as the Bennington Triangle. The route the bus was taking from the second last stop and into Bennington had a short distance that went right through the borders of the triangle. This road is known as Route 7. This is a strange coincidence, as James could have vanished anywhere along that route. He could have gotten off at any stop along the route or just disappeared, and yet he exactly disappeared within those boundary lines. Only about a week later did staff at the soldiers' home contact James Tedford's family to find out where he was. This means that he was not officially declared missing until a week after he actually disappeared. This led to the conclusion that witnesses that were on the bus that day managed to mix up small details and already forget some crucial things about that day because they were only questioned more than a week after the incident. Even if James did get off the bus at a different stop and the witnesses just didn't recount the story correctly, it still doesn't explain why James Tedford never returned home and was never seen or heard of by his family or by his friends again. The fourth person to disappear, and probably the most tragic, was an 8-year-old boy named Paul Jepson. Paul Jepson disappeared on the 12th of October in 1950. On that day, Paul accompanied his mother to her place of work, which was at a rubbish dump. His mother went off to go tend to the pigs that she had to feed as her job, and left Paul behind to play in the pickup truck. The woman recalled that on that day, she was only gone for about an hour, which wasn't as long as she would normally take. She did, however, before going off, give Paul strict rules to not open the door of the truck or leave the truck at any point. When his mother returned after her task, Paul was nowhere to be seen. Paul was also reported to be wearing a bright red top, similar to Paula Welden, which would be very difficult not to spot in the greenery of the forest. Hundreds of people soon joined in for the search for the boy. However, nothing was found. A sheriff from New Hampshire brought in a bloodhound to try capture the scent of the boy. The bloodhound did actually end up catching the scent of the child. However, after leading the search party to a crossroads, the dog abruptly lost his scent again. This may suggest a possible abduction of the boy by a motorist passing by on the road. Coincidentally, and very eerily, this road where the scent was lost was also the exact same road that was where Paula Welden was last seen nearby. The case continued with no new leads or clues of the boy's whereabouts, and obviously soon speculation had started that the boy's parents were somehow involved in his disappearance. An even shocking theory was that the parents had fed the boy to the pigs at the dump to get rid of his remains. Paul's father would later go on to tell the Albany Times-Union that the boy was much too curious to stay behind in the truck and was soon making his way into the mountains. It is alleged that all Paul could speak about in the days leading up to him and his mother's trip to the dump was about the Glastenbury mountains and how amazed and mesmerized he was by then, much to the confusion and concern of his father. The final mysterious disappearance in this 5-year span was that of Frieda Langer. Frieda would go missing only 2 weeks after Paul had disappeared, compared to the years' differences between the other disappearances. Frieda Langer was 53 years old and an experienced hiker and survivalist when she went out on a hike in the Glastenbury Mountains on the 28th of October in the year 1950. She was camping at the Somerset Reservoir with her family and was very familiar with this area. Frieda's cousin, Herbert Elsner, accompanied Frieda on the hike on the Long Trail, the same trail that Paula Welden had hiked and disappeared on. During the hike, about a half mile in, Frieda slipped and fell into a stream. With her clothes now wet, Frieda asked her cousin to remain at the spot where they were so she could quickly return to the campsite and change her clothes. Herbert did wait for a while, but decided to go back to the campsite after she didn't return. When he returned, Herbert discovered that his cousin didn't actually make the half-mile back to the campsite after all. Her husband was there, resting as he had an injured knee, but didn't recall seeing Frieda. She was immediately reported as missing, and for the next 2 weeks, 5 searches were conducted to try and find her. The searches included multiple types of aircraft and hundreds of searches. Tragically, this case turned out different to the other cases. On the 12th of May in 1951, 7 months after her disappearance, Frieda's body had been found. Her body was actually found in an area near Somerset Reservoir where their campsite was. And what made it even stranger was that that specific area was already searched and combed through extensively. No cause of death could be established after her body had been found due to the condition it had deteriorated to over the past 7 months. This only fueled further speculation of how Frieda may have passed away. These 5 disappearances were not the only disappearances to have occurred in this area, but are by far the most mysterious ones. It is said the mountainous area of Glastenbury is the location of as many as 40 disappearances. These 5 cases are only tied together in the sense that they have absolutely no explanations, no evidence, and no final conclusions of what may have happened. These cases all did occur in the same general area as well. Another strange connection between these cases is that all the victims were seen for the last time at around 3 to 4 p.m. The times of disappearance of these victims is also eerily similar, as all their disappearances were limited to the last 3 months of the year, from October to December. As for causes, not one specific possibility can exactly be pinpointed. So far, the speculated causes range from the supernatural in the case of James Tedford, to being murdered or abducted, to the people simply becoming lost and passing from exposure in the wilderness. Other theories range from a possible serial killer, to paranormal forces, to UFOs, to even Bigfoot. The serial killer theory, despite being one of the most believable, is argued against. This is due to the patterns of serial killers, as they usually target victims around the same age or gender. Reports of other various strange incidents in this area come as no surprise considering the disappearances there. Strange lights in the sky, strange smells and sounds have all been encountered in this area since before it had even been established as a town. The Native American community that lived in the Bennington area, and specifically where the triangle is now, all believed that wearing red was bad luck and was attracting trouble. This turned out to be true, unfortunately, for both Paula Welden and Paul Jepson. Along with this belief, the former community had their reservations about the area for years before. The Native Americans believed to set foot in the Glastenbury Mountains unless they were burying their dead. This is because they believe that these mountains are cursed due to the wind patterns. There may be some evidence to this belief, as the wind patterns in these mountains are quite erratic, as well as the unpredictable weather and plant life in this area growing at strange angles. The Native Americans in this area also believed there to be a strange, large stone on the top of the Glastenbury Mountains that would swallow people whole when they stood on it. This stone could be attributed to a possible form of quicksand. Despite these events happening over 70 years ago and the progress that has since been made in forensic technology, no further findings have been made so far, and it may be too late. That's the video for today. Thank you so much for watching. If you are still here, please don't forget to like and subscribe down below, and please feel free to comment any suggestions of content you would like to see next.